Hi, I'm Gordon Burkell from Filmmaker U. At Filmmaker U, we create courses for film professionals to deepen and diversify your existing skill set. You can learn more at filmmakeru.com. Of course, follow us on Instagram at filmmaker_u. Every week, we interview a film professional to discuss their work, and this week I'm joined by costume designer Farnaz Khaki-Sadigh, whose work includes The 100, Space Force, and more recently, Avatar: The Last Airbender, just to name a few. Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
I guess my first question for you, thinking about Air Avatar: The Last Airbender, um, how did you get involved in this show?
Um, Funny enough, it's no secret. I'm a big fan of the animation already. So I was very excited when they announced that they were going to do a live action. And then as soon as I heard it, I'm like, that's the show that I want to work on. I'm like, that's my goal. Um, I let my agent know at the time. And I'm like, let's follow it and see where it lands and see if we can get on it. And after COVID, it kind of like sort of like um didn't hear anything, kind
Mhm.
of went away and didn't know like what was happening with it. And so it kind of like it went in the back of my mind and didn't really think about it. And then when they like I was on Space Force actually, and my agent's like, oh well, Trade Winds is coming back on their secret name. And I'm like, what's that? So she's like, well, it's Avatar. And I'm like, oh my God, I really want to get on it. So she's like, do you still want, well, if you still want to get on, I will try and get your resume. And so it's like, so they got my resume in and, I basically took about 3 months of interviews and planning presentations and going out there and like just doing the presentations and waiting to hear back, and
Mhm.
finally I got the job, and it was surreal. Like it's still surreal to me that I actually got to do it.
I grew up in a household in the projects in East Harlem. There's a program at WNET, the public television station, to get more people of color behind the camera, in the editing room, doing sound, writing scripts. When they put me in a dark room and they showed me how to use the splicer and the rewinds, I felt this big sigh of relief, this sense of, wow, I found my space. The editing part of filmmaking is the real nuts and bolts, what makes films come to life. You can ask Spielberg, you can ask Tarantino, you can ask Spike. When you sit here, this is where the proof is in the pudding. I'm Sam Pollard, and this is my class on documentary editing.
You mentioned you're a fan, so you know how much people love the original animation, like
Absolutely.
deep love for that animation. So I'm wondering,
Yeah.
what kind of pressure did you feel, or did you put pressure on yourself when you were doing this? Like how did you tackle this when
Both.
creating looks?
It was a lot of pressures. Like, I mean, I kind of like had to like think about it from different hats. Like, I had to think about it as a fan myself. I had to think about it as like, okay, well, what does other fans want to see? What was done in the past that wasn't right? And then also then you have to put on this hat as like, okay, well, what is best for this project? And how best to culturally and historically like represent the looks in real life, and still kind of stay true to the animation. So it was a lot of pressure and a lot of like nerves kind of like, twitching at times and just kind of like trying to get going. But I think we did a good job. I mean, I love what we came up with. I love what my team did. So far, I've gotten a lot of comments on it that a lot of fans are happy. So I'm glad, we really wanted to stay true to the animation. Like that was my ultimate goal. Is like I wanted to stay true to the animation, make sure that I didn't miss anything. And at the same time, I was, culturally and historically respectful of
When you,
the inspirations counterpart inspirations in real life.
well, it's interesting because you talked about the cultural uh sort of history and the history of it.
Yeah.
And it references different, like in one of the interviews I found, where you talked about the Inuit in the north. There was
Yeah.
another, there's stuff from Asia. And I'm wondering, how do you, as a costume designer, how do you bring in those elements and be respectful of them so that people aren't upset and feel that it's being co-opted or taken to make money?
It's a lot of research for me. So I took a good 3, 4 months of like just doing research, and learning about the different cultures that are referenced in the animation, and studying them, their history, their time period, because the time period is between like mid 1800s to late 1800s. That's where it's referenced from. So I really sort of kind of like delved into history of the time, read a lot of books, saw a lot of documentaries, articles, like anything I could kind of get my hands on, looked at paintings from that time period. For the Inuit and the indigenous aspect of it, like I was fortunate enough to like talk to actual elders from the community here in BC. They connected, like I talked to the Indigenous community here in BC, which connected me to the Inuit community in Northern Canada. I got to meet a lot of artists from those communities that helped actually, design trims and make trims and do a lot of beadwork for the Northern and the Southern Weather Tribe. They taught us like how to respectfully like build the parkas, how to treat the fur. Even though we didn't use real fur, we
Mhm.
had to kind of like, they're like, okay, well, when you sew the fur into the parka, it has to point a certain direction. It has to be sewn in a certain way. It has to hang a certain way. And just all of those like little details that are really helpful that you wouldn't really know off the hand, or you wouldn't be able to read about it. I got firsthand information from the community, which was amazing to me. Like,
Mhm.
it was a really amazing learning experience.
Well, and
But
that
yeah,
must
it's
have,
just,
sorry.
go ahead.
Well, I was going to say that must have, it almost opens up, like it must have been so exciting because then you're getting to see all these new styles or new ways of doing, you know,
Yeah,
design.
absolutely. Yeah,
Uh,
absolutely.
so sorry, what were you going to say?
Well, I was just gonna say, and it's like, taking all of that information and then just kind of like applying it to the animation and just taking the characters in the world and just blending the two together. So
Mhm.
that's
Now, usually I ask costume designers, like everything starts with the script, what did you look for in the script? But you also had the animation. So between the two of those, what did you, when you started getting the scripts and started going through them, what did you look for signs of what to design?
I think it was just like what was included in the scripts, that wasn't in the animation, and then what was in the animation that wasn't included in the script. There was a lot of discussions back and forth as to like what the producers and the creative team wanted to include, how they wanted to include it, what was important to make sure we featured, what wasn't, and just kind of taking all of those elements and then combining them together. Um, but yeah, it's like, I mean, I read this, I knew the animation, like, because I'd watched it so many times and I knew the lore behind it. So that was very helpful to me in essence, like when I was reading the scripts and then
Mhm.
taking the scripts and breaking them down and then pulling the characteristics. I mean, for the most part, when I was reading the scripts, it's very much true characteristic wise to what the animation portrayed. So that really
Mhm.
helped sort of like not have to bridge too much of a gap between them. So,
So
but
when you started working on this, the actors are going to come in and give input as well. So how did things change once the actors sort of started trying things on and getting involved?
it's I think for the most part, the actors' involvement was with a lot of the movements and their freedom
Mhm.
to move and ability to be able to do the martial art movements and the stunts and the actions that they needed to do for the bending parts. Those are the elements that we really took into consideration from the cast. A lot of the designs were done before the cast came in, so that's sort of like, we didn't really change much of it in terms of like fabrics and materials that we used, and like, how placements of things, we kind of made adjustments once it was on the actor. We also did a lot of testing beforehand. Like, I mean, before we even got the cast, I did like with the armors, like I would, pull in stunt people that were rehearsing, and I'm like, okay, you need to try this on and you need to do like some actions. I need to see how this moves. I need to see like, if it's going to fall, if it's not going to fall, if it's going to weigh them down. Can you like do your kicks in it? All of that. We did a lot of testing beforehand before we even put it on the cast.
Well, it's an interesting, like, because there is a lot of action in this. So
Absolutely.
with the stunt actors, like, did you do things like, I wonder, like I've talked to certain departments are bringing in a lot of 3D printers and building stuff. Did you guys do that to like sort of replicate metal and make it look lighter, but like metal, but be lighter? Or how
Yeah,
did you tackle that?
we did a lot of molding, and we used a lot of leather and leather carving, and just with the leather, like we painted it to look like metal, so like there's a lot of like that element in there because it's lighter than like 3D printing, and it's softer, so like if you land on it or if it hits you, it's not gonna hurt
Hurt.
as much as something else.
Yeah.
We do have a lot of 3D printed elements, like all the Kyoshi warrior headdresses are 3D printed. All of the headpieces, like the crowns for like Ozai and Azula, and all of those are 3D printed. We basically used a lot of different elements in there, so to make it work. But
So what was your approach to sort of designing the overall look for each of the nations? Like, how did you approach each one to create a unique feeling?
once we figured out sort of like once I've kind of like done my research portion of it, we kind of sat down and go, okay, well, how can we sort of like map this out? And there's a lot of like different elements in the animation where it's like, even like the Fire Nation like expands over, like takes inspiration from many different regions, like Japan, Thailand, Philippines, most of like Southeast Asia. But we wanted to kind of like be a little bit more specific. It's like, okay, well, where do we want to, place this? Like, if it was in the real world, like what part of the region would this be? What part of the continent would this be? Omashu is very much inspired by India and Central Asia. So that sort of like took the elements from that and then kind of created that world of Omashu from there, from, taking that and kind of connecting it to the real life. With the air nomads, like, we wanted each air, there's 4 different air nations, like, so you have the east, south, west, and north. Each of those is based on a different sort of like Buddhist monk kind of elements, like, the Southern Water Nation is very much based on Tibetan monks, whereas like, we have like the north and the east and the west that are based on Japanese monks or Vietnamese monks and Chinese monks. So like they have different styles and silhouettes and color palette to kind of but they're still within the same world. So we just kind of like tried to assign sort of like a specific real life region to each of those nations, and then build from there.
I guess my next question is, you started in theater. So what did you, I guess, what did you learn when in theater that you've brought into filmmaking that other people might not be aware of?
With theater, like as a designer or as, in anything, like, your budget is much lower, so you get to do a lot of the things yourself, as opposed to having like a team of people. Like, I mean, on Avatar, I had a team of plus people under me, like helping out, which is a huge team. Whereas like most of the time in theater, it's just me, maybe one other person, or like, or a few other people like doing it. So that really helps you sort of understand what needs to be done and look at everything from all aspects of it, as opposed to just sort of like the design portion of it. And having that training in theater is like, I've been trained in like, garment construction, pattern making, dyeing, everything. So I know all aspects of and elements of like what it takes to make a costume from an illustration, or like from an idea to an illustration to the final product. So it makes it a lot easier for me to communicate to my dyer, for example, like what I want and what I need and how I want it done, or to my cutter in terms of like, this is what I want, this is how I kind of want it cut, and this is where I want this, the lines to be, or the seams to be. And those elements help a lot, with my work in film, because not a lot of people have that background. And it just makes it sometimes, when you don't understand how a garment is supposed to fit on a body, or how it's supposed to be constructed, it's hard to communicate that to somebody else to do it for you and get the exact same results that you want from it.
So would you say that, like, when you have young people coming to ask you about career advice, do you suggest that they start in theater, or do you suggest?
Not necessarily, but what I always say to people is like, I'm like, even if you don't want to start in theater, or if you don't want to start, start, oh, I know people come in and they're like, oh, well, I want to be an assistant. It's like, well, you don't have the experience, you don't have the knowledge to run a team. And, I don't suggest that you start up here, start down here, learn what goes on in a team, learn about each of the different departments within the costume department, and learn the skills behind it. Even if it's not something that you want to base your career on, you should at least try it for a week, just to understand what really goes into it. Learn breakdown, learn dyeing, learn all of those aspects, because it really helps, especially when you want to be a designer. Some people don't. Some people like are happy just staying, as a set supervisor, or or a costume supervisor, or an assistant. But if you really want to be at that level of being a designer, then it's really important to learn about all the different departments underneath you that you have to run, because it makes it so much easier to try and convey what you want and what you really want to see in the final product, if you have that experience of knowing how it's done in the first place.
So my last question for you is, what is your favorite guilty pleasure film or TV show to watch?
I actually love watching cartoons. So
Any in particular?
I love Disney cartoons. I am kind of, that's like sort of like I go back and watch them over and over again. Disney animations, and I mean, like, I love like stuff like, Family Guy and American Dad, and you know
Do you
just
ever did you ever get into Bluey on Disney?
no, I didn't actually.
It's a kids show, but it's really adults like love it.
Yeah,
And it's
cool.
basically 7-minute shorts about this dog family.
Oh, I'm
Um,
gonna have to try
it's
and
just,
watch that.
yeah, yeah, it's just each one's just a really interesting,
Wow.
fun episode. So, well, thank you so much for letting me interview.
No worries. Thank you for having me on. It's been a pleasure.
And that's it for this week, everyone. Make sure to check us out at filmmakeru.com, or of course on Instagram at filmmaker_you. I'm Gordon Burkell. Thanks for watching.